The phone rang at 9:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, and I knew before I even looked at the screen that it would be Anthony. He had this way of calling when I was already thinking about him, which happened to be most of the time these days. What I didn't expect was the panic in his voice when I answered. "Stephen, I need a huge favor," he said without preamble, his words tumbling over each other in that way that meant he was pacing around his apartment. Like, massive. And you're probably going to think I'm insane, but I'm kind of desperate here. I set down the book I'd been pretending to read and gave him my full attention. "What's going on?" "It's Hannah from work. You know, the one I told you about? She's been persistent. Really persistent. And there's this company party Friday night, and she's been dropping hints all week about going together. And He paused, and I could hear him take a shaky breath. "I told her I was seeing someone." My heart did something complicated in my chest. Anthony had been complaining about Hannah's advances for weeks, how she'd find excuses to stop by his desk, how she'd suggested drinks after work multiple times. I'd listened with what I hoped was appropriate sympathy while dying a little inside each time he mentioned dating women so casually, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Okay," I said carefully. "So what's the problem?" "The problem is she asked who," and I panicked, and I said I'd bring him to the party. Another pause. "Stephen, I said I'd bring my boyfriend to the party." The word hit me like a physical blow. Boyfriend. I'd imagined Anthony saying that word about me approximately 1,000 times in the past 6 months, but never like this. Never as a lie. "I know it's crazy," he continued, his voice getting higher. "But I was thinking, maybe you could come with me? Just for the night? I mean, we're close enough that it would be believable, right? And you're good with people, and you know how to handle social situations, and—" "Anthony." I cut him off before he could spiral further. "Are you asking me to pretend to be your boyfriend?" "Yes." The word came out small and desperate. "I know it's asking a lot, and I know it's weird, but I just need Hannah to back off, and this seemed like the easiest way to. I'll do it." The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them, before I could think about what I was agreeing to, before I could consider the exquisite torture of pretending to be something I'd wanted to be for real for months. Really. The relief in his voice was palpable. "Oh my God, Stephen, thank you. You're literally saving my life here. If this story hits you, drop a heart in the comments." I wanted to tell him that he wasn't saving my life at all, that he was about to destroy it in the most beautiful way possible. Instead, I heard myself saying, "It's fine. We're friends. That's what friends do." Friends. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. Anthony had been my best friend since we'd met at a coffee shop 2 years ago, bonding over our shared love of obscure indie films and our mutual inability to keep plants alive. He was straight, confident, effortlessly charming in a way that made everyone want to be around him. He dated women casually, never seriously, and talked about his dates with the kind of detached amusement that made me wonder if he was capable of falling in love at all. I, on the other hand, had been in love with him for approximately 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. Not that I was counting. It had started slowly, the way these things always do. A lingering look here, a casual touch there. The way he'd lean against me during movie nights, the way he'd text me random thoughts throughout the day, the way he'd seek me out when he needed someone to talk to. I told myself it was just friendship, that I was reading too much into innocent gestures, that my feelings were one-sided and pathetic. But there had been moments. Moments when he'd look at me with something that seemed like longing, when his hand would linger on my shoulder a beat too long, when he'd fall asleep on my couch, and I'd watch him breathe and wonder what it would be like to wake up next to him every morning. Those moments had been enough to keep hope alive in my chest, even when logic told me I was being ridiculous. Anthony was straight. He'd never given me any real indication that he saw me as anything more than a friend. And now he was asking me to pretend to be his boyfriend, which felt like the universe playing the cruelest joke imaginable. "So what's the plan?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "What do I need to know?" "Just be yourself, I guess. We know each other well enough that it should be natural. Hold my hand. Maybe put your arm around me, that kind of thing. Nothing too intense. Just enough to make it believable. Hold his hand. Put my arm around him. Act like we were together." I closed my eyes and tried to imagine surviving an entire evening of pretending to have what I wanted most in the world. "Stephen? You still there?" "Yeah," I managed. "I'm here. Just thinking about logistics. You're the best, you know that? I owe you big time for this." "No," I wanted to say. You don't owe me anything. You're about to give me the most perfect, horrible night of my life, and I'm going to pretend to be grateful for the scraps of affection you're willing to perform for an audience. Don't worry about it, I said instead. What time should I pick you up? We talked through the details for another few minutes. The party was at a hotel downtown. Cocktail attire starts at 7. I took notes like I was preparing for a business meeting instead of the emotional devastation I was about to willingly walk into. After we hung up, I sat in my apartment staring at my phone, wondering what I'd just agreed to. 3 days from now, I'd be standing next to Anthony, holding his hand, pretending to be his boyfriend while my heart broke in real time. I'd smile and make conversation with his coworkers, play the part of the devoted partner, and then go home alone and pretend it hadn't meant anything. But even as I sat there cataloging all the ways this could destroy me, I knew I'd do it again. I'd do anything Anthony asked, even if it killed me. Especially if it meant getting to touch him, to stand close to him, to have him look at me with something that resembled love, even if it was just an act. 3 days. I had 3 days to prepare for the most beautiful lie of my life. The hotel's grand ballroom buzzed with sophisticated chatter and the gentle clink of champagne glasses. Stephen adjusted his navy blazer for the 3rd time, suddenly convinced he'd overdressed for Anthony's company party. The crystal chandeliers cast warm light across clusters of well-dressed professionals, and he felt like an imposter among Anthony's successful colleagues. "You look perfect," Anthony said, appearing at his elbow with 2 glasses of wine. "Stop fidgeting." Stephen accepted the glass gratefully, his fingers brushing Anthony's in a way that sent electricity up his arm. Anthony looked devastatingly handsome in his charcoal suit, his dark hair perfectly styled, and Stephen had to remind himself that this was all performance. Just a favor for a friend. "Ready to meet the infamous Hannah?" Anthony asked, scanning the room with practiced ease. Before Stephen could respond, Anthony's hand found the small of his back, guiding him toward a group of colleagues. The touch was casual, natural, but it made Stephen's breath catch. He'd dreamed of Anthony's hands on him countless times, but never imagined it would happen like this. "Everyone, I'd like you to meet Stephen," Anthony announced smoothly, his arm sliding around Stephen's waist. "My boyfriend." The word sent a jolt through Stephen's chest. Anthony said it so easily, like it was the most natural thing in the world. Stephen managed to smile as introductions were made, shaking hands with marketing directors and account managers whose names immediately escaped him. "How long have you two been together?" asked a woman with kind eyes and silver hair. 6 months, Anthony replied without hesitation, pulling Stephen closer. "Though it feels like I've been waiting for him my whole life." Stephen's heart hammered against his ribs. Anthony was an even better actor than he'd expected. The way he looked at Stephen while saying it, with such warmth and affection, made Stephen forget for a moment that none of this was real. "That's so sweet," the woman continued. "You can tell when 2 people are genuinely happy together." Stephen felt heat rise in his cheeks. If only she knew how genuinely happy he was, and how completely one-sided it was. "There's Hannah," Anthony murmured in his ear, his breath warm against Stephen's neck. "Blonde woman by the bar. She's heading this way." Stephen turned to see an attractive woman in a red dress approaching with determined confidence. His stomach knotted as he realized this was the moment of truth. "Anthony." Hannah's smile was bright, but Stephen caught the slight tightness around her eyes. "I was hoping you'd be here tonight." "Hannah, hi." Anthony's voice remained friendly, but Stephen felt his posture shift slightly. "I'd like you to meet Stephen. My boyfriend." Hannah's expression faltered for just a moment before she recovered with admirable grace. "Oh, it's wonderful to meet you, Stephen. Anthony's mentioned you." "Has he?" Stephen managed, surprised by how steady his voice sounded. "All good things, I hope." "Of course." Hannah laughed, though it sounded forced. "You're a lucky man. Anthony's quite the catch." "Don't I know it?" Stephen replied, and was startled by how genuine his own words sounded. Anthony's hand tightened slightly on his waist. "Well, I should let you two get back to enjoying the party," Hannah said, her smile never wavering. "It was lovely meeting you, Stephen." As she walked away, Stephen felt Anthony's body relax against his side. The relief was palpable, but Anthony didn't move away. Instead, his thumb began tracing small circles on Stephen's hip through his jacket. "That went better than expected," Anthony said quietly. "She took it well." "She seems nice," Stephen offered, though his attention was entirely focused on Anthony's continued touch. Just persistent. You have no idea, Anthony chuckled. Thank you for this. I know it's probably weird, pretending to be my boyfriend. If only he knew how not weird it felt. How right it felt to stand here with Anthony's arm around him, to be introduced as his boyfriend, to have Anthony look at him with such apparent affection. Stephen took a sip of wine to steady himself. It's not weird, he said carefully. We're friends. Friends help each other. Anthony's gaze lingered on his face for a moment longer than necessary. Right? Friends. The evening continued with a blur of conversations and introductions. Stephen found himself genuinely enjoying Anthony's colleagues, who were funnier and more down-to-earth than he'd expected. But more than that, he was mesmerized by Anthony's performance. Anthony stayed close throughout the night, his hand finding Stephen's arm while they talked, his fingers brushing Stephen's when he handed him fresh drinks. He laughed at Stephen's jokes with genuine delight, leaned in close when Stephen spoke, and looked at him with such warmth that Stephen kept forgetting they were acting. You're really good at this, Stephen said during a quiet moment when they'd stepped aside from a particularly animated conversation about quarterly projections. Good at what? Anthony asked, his hand coming to rest on Stephen's forearm. The boyfriend thing. You seem so natural at it. Something flickered across Anthony's expression, too quick for Stephen to interpret. Do I? I guess I don't know. It doesn't feel like acting. Stephen's heart skipped. What do you mean? But before Anthony could answer, his boss appeared, wanting to introduce them to some clients from out of town. The moment was lost, but Anthony's words echoed in Stephen's mind as they made their way across the room. It doesn't feel like acting. Stephen tried to push the thought away, to remind himself that Anthony was just being kind, that he was probably just relieved the Hannah situation was resolved. But as the evening wore on, he found it harder and harder to maintain that rational distance. When Anthony's hand found his during a particularly boring speech from the company president, Stephen's resolve began to crumble. When Anthony leaned over to whisper a joke in his ear, his lips brushing Stephen's temple, Stephen felt his careful emotional walls start to crack. This was exactly what he'd been afraid of. The pretense was too close to his deepest desire, too similar to what he'd imagined in his most private moments. Every touch, every smile, every casual endearment was a sweet torture that he wasn't sure he could endure much longer. But Anthony seemed completely at ease, charming and relaxed in a way that Stephen had rarely seen him. He looked genuinely happy, and that happiness was somehow centered on Stephen, even if it was all just an elaborate performance. As they moved through the crowd, Stephen caught glimpses of Hannah watching them from across the room. She looked sad but resigned, and Stephen felt a pang of sympathy for her. At least her feelings were honest, even if they were unrequited. Unlike his own situation, where everything was built on deception and impossible longing. As the evening progresses, I find myself drowning in the details of Anthony's performance. Every casual touch sends electricity through my skin, and I'm hyper-aware of how his hand finds the small of my back when he guides me through conversations with his colleagues. When he laughs at something I say, his fingers brush against my forearm in a gesture that feels so natural, so unconscious, that I wonder if he even realizes he's doing it. Stephen works in graphic design. Anthony tells his manager, David, and his hand slides up to rest on my shoulder blade. The warmth of his palms seeps through my shirt, and I have to concentrate on forming coherent responses about my freelance work while my body betrays me with every accelerated heartbeat. He's incredibly talented. You should see the logo he designed for my cousin's bakery. The pride in Anthony's voice catches me off guard. This isn't part of the act. I did design that logo, and Anthony had genuinely loved it when I showed him the final version 3 months ago. But the way he's looking at me now, with such genuine admiration and affection, makes my chest tighten with dangerous hope. That's wonderful, David says, and I notice how his eyes crinkle with genuine warmth. Anthony's been much happier lately. We were all wondering what had changed. Anthony's thumb traces a small circle against my shoulder blade, and I nearly forget to breathe. I guess I found what I was looking for, he says softly, and when I look up at him, the expression in his eyes is so tender that I have to look away before I do something stupid like kiss him in front of his boss. The conversation flows around us, but I'm lost in the sensation of Anthony's touch, the way he stays close enough that I can smell his cologne, the way he includes me in every story and glance. When someone asks how we met, Anthony launches into the real story of our friendship with such genuine fondness that I find myself smiling despite the ache in my chest. We were both at this terrible coffee shop near campus, Anthony says, his hand moving to rest on my lower back. Stephen was trying to work on his laptop, and this guy at the next table was talking so loudly on his phone that I could see Stephen getting more and more frustrated. Finally, Stephen just packed up his stuff and moved to a different table, but the guy followed him and kept talking even louder. I remember that day perfectly. Anthony had been sitting across the cafe, and I'd been stealing glances at him for 20 minutes, thinking he was the most beautiful man I'd ever seen. So I went over and asked if I could sit with Stephen. Anthony continues, his thumb brushing against my spine in a way that makes me shiver. Figured the guy wouldn't bother him if someone else was there. We ended up talking for 3 hours. Best coffee shop interruption of my life, I managed to say, and Anthony's smile is so radiant that I have to remind myself we're surrounded by his coworkers. As the evening continues, I notice how Anthony's touches become more frequent, more lingering. When we're standing in a circle with his team for marketing, his fingers find mine and intertwine without any apparent conscious thought. When someone tells a particularly funny story, he leans into me slightly, his shoulder pressing against mine as he laughs. During a lull in conversation, he turns to me with such focus and attention that I feel like I'm the only person in the room. "You're being so good about this," he murmurs, close enough that his breath tickles my ear. "I know this isn't exactly how you plan to spend your Friday night." The irony is devastating. This is exactly how I've dreamed of spending every Friday night for months. But the knowledge that it's all performance makes every moment feel like a beautiful torture. "It's fine," I whisper back, hoping my voice doesn't betray how much I'm struggling. "You do the same for me." Anthony's hand squeezes mine, and he doesn't let go. "Would I?" he asks, and there's something in his tone that makes me look at him sharply. For a moment, his mask slips, and I see something raw and uncertain in his expression. But then someone approaches us, and the moment passes. The physical closeness is intoxicating but painful. Every time Anthony's thumb traces across my knuckles, every time he guides me through the crowd with his hand on my back, every time he looks at me with such warmth and affection, I feel myself falling deeper into a fantasy that I know will end the moment we leave this party. I find myself cataloging every touch, every glance, every moment of tenderness, knowing I'll replay them obsessively later when I'm alone, and trying to convince myself that some of it felt real. When the music shifts to something slower and couples begin moving toward the makeshift dance floor, I assume Anthony will suggest we get another drink or find his colleagues to continue networking. Instead, he turns to me with an expression I can't quite read. "Dance with me?" he asks, and his voice is softer than it's been all evening. My heart hammers against my ribs. "Anthony, we don't have to." "I want to," he interrupts, and the sincerity in his voice makes my breath catch. "Please." I let him lead me to the dance floor, hyper-aware of every point of contact as he positions us properly. His hand settles on my waist, and I place mine on his shoulder, trying to maintain some semblance of appropriate distance even as he draws me closer. The song is something slow and romantic, and I can feel the warmth of his body against mine, the steady rhythm of his breathing. "This is nice," Anthony says quietly, and I realize he's relaxed against me in a way that feels too genuine for performance. His body fits against mine perfectly, and when he rests his forehead briefly against my temple, I have to close my eyes to maintain my composure. "Yeah," I whisper, because I can't trust myself to say anything more substantial without my voice breaking. We sway together in comfortable silence, and I'm acutely aware of how right this feels, how natural. Anthony's hand spreads wider across my back, pulling me incrementally closer, and I can feel the tension leaving his shoulders as we move together. This doesn't feel like acting anymore. This feels like something I've been dreaming about for months, and the knowledge that it's temporary makes every second both precious and agonizing. "I've never felt this comfortable with anyone," Anthony murmurs against my ear, and his words send a shiver through my entire body. The confession hits me like a physical blow, and I feel my carefully constructed emotional walls beginning to crumble. This is too much, too real, too intimate, too close to everything I've wanted and can't have. I start to pull away, overwhelmed by the cruelty of the situation, but Anthony's arms tighten around me. "Stephen," he says quietly, and there's something urgent in his voice. Why are you running? I can't look at him. I can't do this anymore. The pretense is killing me, and Anthony's unexpected tenderness is making it impossible to maintain the emotional distance I need to survive this evening intact. The music had shifted to something slower, more intimate, and somehow Anthony had guided us onto the dance floor without me fully realizing it was happening. His hand found the small of my back, warm and steady, while his other hand took mine with a gentleness that made my chest tighten. We weren't the only couple dancing, but in that moment, surrounded by the soft glow of the hotel ballroom's chandeliers and the murmur of conversations from nearby tables, it felt like we were completely alone. You're tense, Anthony murmured, his breath warm against my ear as he pulled me closer. Relax. It's just me. Just him. If only he knew that was exactly the problem. I tried to follow his lead, to let my body move with his, but every point of contact between us felt like it was burning through my carefully constructed walls. His thumb traced small circles on my back, and I had to bite the inside of my cheek to keep from making some embarrassing sound. Better, he said softly, and I could hear the smile in his voice. See? We're good at this. We were good at this. That was the cruelest part of all. The way Anthony's body fit against mine, the way he seemed to anticipate my movements, the way his hand squeezed mine just a little tighter when the music swelled. It all felt so natural, so right, that I kept forgetting this was supposed to be an act. For a few dangerous seconds, I let myself imagine this was real. That Anthony had asked me to dance because he wanted to, not because Hannah was watching from across the room with her disappointed smile. Thank you, Anthony said suddenly, his voice quieter now, more serious. For doing this. I know it's probably weird, pretending to be. It's not weird, I interrupted, perhaps too quickly. The last thing I needed was for him to start analyzing what we were doing, to remind me that this was all just a performance. We're friends. Friends help each other out. But even as I said it, I knew it was a lie. Friends didn't feel their hearts race when their friends' fingers traced along their spine. Friends didn't have to concentrate on breathing when their friend's cologne filled their senses. Friends didn't spend 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days cataloging every smile, every laugh, every casual touch, storing them away like precious treasures. Anthony was quiet for a moment, his forehead almost touching mine as we swayed together. I've never felt this comfortable with anyone, he said finally, and the words were so soft I almost thought I'd imagined them. Dancing, I mean. Usually I feel like I have 2 left feet. My heart stuttered. There was something in his voice, something vulnerable and honest that didn't sound like performance at all. I risked looking up at him, and the expression on his face made my breath catch. He was looking at me like I was something precious, something worth protecting, like I mattered in a way that went beyond friendship. Anthony, I started, but I didn't know how to finish. What could I say? That I dreamed about moments like this? That I'd imagined us dancing together in my apartment late at night, with no audience, no pretense, just us? That every time he touched me tonight, I died a little inside because I knew it wasn't real? What? He asked, his hand moving from my back to cup my face gently. The gesture was so tender, so intimate, that I felt my composure finally start to crack. You look like you're about to cry. I was about to cry. The kindness in his voice, the way he was looking at me, the impossible gentleness of his touch, it was too much. I'd been holding back for so long, pretending I was fine with just being his friend, pretending that watching him date other people didn't tear me apart, pretending that tonight was just a favor between friends. But I couldn't pretend anymore. Not when he was touching me like this, not when he was looking at me like I was the only person in the room. I can't do this, I whispered, trying to step back, but Anthony's arms tightened around me, keeping me close. Can't do what? His brow furrowed with concern. Stephen, what's wrong? Everything. Everything was wrong. I was in love with my best friend, and he was straight, and he was only holding me like this because he needed me to play a role. And I was selfish enough to want it anyway, even knowing it would destroy me. I need some air, I said, more firmly this time, and managed to pull away from his embrace. The loss of his warmth felt like a physical ache. But Anthony followed me, his hand catching mine as I tried to leave the dance floor. Wait. Stephen, please. What's going on? You've been acting strange all night. I turned back to him, and the genuine worry in his eyes almost broke me completely. He cared about me. I knew he did. just not in the way I needed him to. I'm fine. I lied, but my voice cracked on the words. I just need a minute. No, you're not fine. Anthony stepped closer, his hand still holding mine. Talk to me. What's wrong? The music continued around us, other couples swaying together, lost in their own worlds. I could see Hannah at a table nearby, pretending not to watch us, and I realized that even now, even in the middle of my emotional breakdown, we were still performing, still pretending. I can't keep pretending, I said finally, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. I'm sorry, Anthony. I thought I could do this, but I can't. I can't keep pretending that this doesn't mean anything to me. Anthony's grip on my hand tightened. What do you mean? I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw my own reflection in his eyes. Saw the confusion there, but also something else. Something that looked almost like hope, though I was probably imagining it. I mean that this isn't just pretend for me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. It never was. And I know that's not fair to you, and I know this is probably going to ruin everything between us, but I can't keep acting like I don't. I stopped, swallowing hard. Like I don't have feelings for you. The words hung in the air between us, and I waited for Anthony to let go of my hand, to step back, to look at me with pity or disgust or awkwardness. I waited for him to tell me that he was sorry, but he didn't feel the same way, that he hoped we could still be friends. Instead, Anthony went completely still. His hand remained in mine, warm and steady, and when I finally found the courage to look at his face, I saw something I didn't expect. He didn't look horrified. He didn't look uncomfortable. He looked like he was finally understanding something that had been confusing him for a long time. Stephen, he said quietly, and there was something different in his voice. Something raw and uncertain and real. I need to tell you something. The words hung between us like a bridge I'd just burned, and for a moment that felt like an eternity, Anthony went completely still in my arms. His body, which had been so relaxed against mine just seconds before, tensed as if my confession had physically struck him. The slow music continued around us, other couples swaying in their own private worlds, but our bubble of pretense had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. I waited for him to step back, to laugh awkwardly and suggest we get some air, to do anything that would let us both pretend this moment never happened. Instead, his grip on my hand tightened, and when I looked up at his face, I saw something I'd never seen before. Not confusion or discomfort, but recognition. Like he'd been waiting for me to say those words, even if he didn't know it himself. Stephen, he whispered, and my name sounded different in his voice, weighted with something I couldn't identify. I need to tell you something. My heart hammered against my ribs as I braced myself for the gentle rejection, the careful explanation of how he cared about me, but not like that, how our friendship meant too much to risk. But Anthony's thumb traced across my knuckles, and the gesture was so tender, so deliberate, that it sent a shock of hope through my system. I didn't ask you to be my fake boyfriend because of Hannah, he said, his voice barely audible over the music. I mean, she was part of it, but that's not the real reason. I stared at him, afraid to breathe, afraid to move, afraid to do anything that might break whatever spell was keeping him talking. His dark eyes were searching my face with an intensity that made my knees weak, and I could feel his heart beating rapidly where our chests pressed together. The real reason, he continued, his voice gaining strength, is that I've been terrified of what I've been feeling for you. For months, Stephen. Every time you smile at me, every time you laugh at something stupid I say, every time you just exist in the same room as me, I feel something I've never felt before. Something that scares the hell out of me. The world tilted on its axis. This couldn't be happening. This was the conversation I'd imagined 1,000 times in my head, the one that always ended with me waking up disappointed. But Anthony's hands were real, his words were real, and the way he was looking at me like I was the only person in the room was devastatingly, impossibly real. I've never been attracted to men, he said, his voice cracking slightly. Never even thought about it. But then there's you. And suddenly I'm lying awake at night thinking about your hands, about the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating, about what it would feel like to kiss you. And I thought I was losing my mind. My breath caught in my throat. Anthony, I asked you to pretend to be my boyfriend because I needed an excuse to be close to you without having to face what it meant, he continued, the words tumbling out like a dam had burst. I thought maybe if I could just have one night of pretending, I could get it out of my system. But being here with you, touching you, having you look at me like you're looking at me right now, it's not making it go away. It's making it stronger. I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes, overwhelmed by the revelation that the torture I'd been experiencing all evening had been mutual. You have no idea what you're saying to me right now, I whispered. I know exactly what I'm saying, he replied, his voice firm despite the vulnerability in his eyes. I'm saying that I think I'm falling in love with my best friend, and it's terrifying and confusing, and I have no idea what it means for who I am or what I want. But I know that when you tried to pull away from me just now, it felt like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. The music swelled around us, and I realized we'd stopped dancing entirely. We were just standing there, holding each other, having the conversation that was going to change everything. Other couples moved around us like water around a stone, but I felt like we were the only two people in the universe. I've been in love with you for 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, I said, my voice shaking. I've been counting because every day felt like a small death, wanting you and thinking I could never have you. Tonight has been the most beautiful torture I've ever experienced. Anthony's eyes widened, and I saw something shift in his expression, relief, maybe, or recognition. 6 months, he repeated softly. That's about when I started feeling different around you. When I started making excuses to spend more time with you. When I started noticing things about you that I'd never noticed about anyone. What kind of things? I asked, hardly daring to believe this was happening. The way you hum when you're working on a design. The way you always order the same coffee, but pretend to consider other options. The way you listen to people, really listen, like their words matter. The way you make me feel like the best version of myself just by being around. He paused, his thumb still tracing patterns on my hand. The way you're looking at me right now, like I'm something precious. I felt a tear slip down my cheek, and Anthony reached up to brush it away with his free hand. The gesture was so gentle, so natural, that it took my breath away. I don't know what this makes me, he said quietly. I don't know if I'm gay or bi, or if you're just the exception to every rule I thought I knew about myself. But I know that I don't want to pretend anymore. I don't want to fake being your boyfriend. I want to try being your actual boyfriend, if you'll have me. The question hung in the air between us, and I realized that despite everything we'd just confessed, he was still afraid of my answer. This brave, beautiful man who'd just turned his entire understanding of himself upside down was still worried I might reject him. Anthony, I said, bringing our joined hands up to press against my chest, over my racing heart. I would love nothing more than to be your actual boyfriend. But are you sure? This isn't just the atmosphere of the party or the adrenaline of the moment. He smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from him all evening, and it was radiant. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Except maybe that I'm about to kiss you, and I don't care who sees. Before I could respond, his lips were on mine, soft and warm and perfect. It wasn't the desperate, passionate kiss of movies. It was gentle and questioning and full of promise. When we broke apart, both of us were breathing hard, and I could see the wonder in his eyes that I was sure was reflected in my own. So, he said, his forehead resting against mine, I guess we're not pretending anymore. No, I agreed, feeling lighter than I had in months. We're definitely not pretending anymore. The hotel ballroom suddenly felt too bright, too crowded, the music too loud against the thundering of my heart. Anthony's confession hung between us like something fragile and precious, and I couldn't quite believe the words had actually left his lips. He'd been questioning his sexuality because of me. Because of me, Anthony. I whispered, my voice barely audible over the slow jazz number that had brought us to this moment. Are you sure? I mean, really sure about what you're saying? He stepped closer, his hands still holding mine, and I could see the vulnerability in his eyes mixed with something that looked like determination. I've never been more terrified or more certain of anything in my life, he said, his thumb tracing small circles on my palm. Stephen, I've been going crazy for months, trying to figure out why I couldn't stop thinking about you, why every time you smiled at me my whole day got better, why I kept finding excuses to touch you or be near you. The dance floor swirled around us, other couples moving in their own worlds, but I felt like we were suspended in a bubble where only his words mattered. I thought I was imagining things, I admitted, my voice shaking. All those moments when you'd look at me a certain way, or when you'd let your hand linger on my shoulder, I convinced myself I was just seeing what I wanted to see. You weren't imagining anything, Anthony said, and his voice carried a weight that made my chest tighten. I was terrified of what it meant, so I kept dating women, kept trying to convince myself that what I felt for you was just really intense friendship. But tonight, pretending to be your boyfriend, feeling how right it was to introduce you that way, to have you by my side. He paused, swallowing hard. I realized I wasn't pretending at all. I was finally being honest. The music shifted to something softer, more intimate, and without thinking, I pulled him closer, needing to feel the solid warmth of him against me. Anthony, I need you to know something, I said, my forehead almost touching his. I've been in love with you for 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. Not just attracted to you, not just infatuated. In love. The kind that makes you rearrange your whole world around someone else's happiness. His breath caught, and I saw his eyes fill with something that might have been tears. 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days, he repeated softly. You've been keeping track. I couldn't help it, I said, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. It was the day you came over with takeout when I was sick with the flu, and you stayed the whole weekend taking care of me. You fell asleep on my couch reading to me, and I looked at you and knew. I knew I was completely gone for you. I remember that weekend, Anthony said, his voice thick with emotion. I remember thinking I'd never felt so content, so right, just taking care of you. I told myself it was because we were such good friends, but he shook his head, a small smile breaking through his serious expression. I think that was when I started falling too. I just wasn't ready to admit it to myself. The realization hit me like a physical force. We've been falling in love with each other this whole time, I said, wonder creeping into my voice. All those months of me thinking I was suffering alone, and you were going through the same thing. The same thing but different, Anthony corrected gently. You knew you were gay, you knew what you were feeling. I was completely lost, Stephen. I kept thinking there was something wrong with me, that I was broken somehow, because I couldn't stop thinking about my best friend. I've never felt this way about a man before. Never even considered it, and suddenly everything I thought I knew about myself was shifting. His honesty was devastating and beautiful, and I felt my heart expand with love for his courage. That must have been terrifying, I said, reaching up to touch his face. I'm so sorry you had to go through that alone. I wasn't alone, he said, leaning into my touch. You were there, even if you didn't know it. Every time you listened to me complain about some meaningless date, every time you made me laugh when I was stressed about work, every time you just existed in my space and made everything better, you were helping me figure out who I really am. The weight of his words settled over me, and I felt tears prick at my eyes. So what happens now? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Where do we go from here? Anthony's hands moved to frame my face, his thumbs brushing away tears I didn't realize had fallen. I don't know, he said honestly. I don't know how to be with a man. I don't know how to navigate coming out to myself, let alone anyone else. I don't know what this means for my family, my job, my whole life. But Stephen, I know I want to figure it out with you. It's going to be complicated, I warned, even as my heart soared at his words. There's going to be confusion and fear and probably some really difficult conversations. Are you ready for that? I'm ready to try, Anthony said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty in his eyes. I'm ready to be brave enough to want what I want instead of what I think I should want. And what I want is you. Not as my fake boyfriend, not as my best friend who I have confusing feelings about. I want you as my real, actual boyfriend, if you'll have me. The question hung between us, loaded with possibility and hope and the promise of everything I dreamed of. Anthony, I said, my voice breaking with emotion, I have been yours for 6 months, 2 weeks, and 3 days. I'll be yours for as long as you'll let me. He kissed me then, soft and sure and full of promise, and this time there was no pretense, no performance for anyone else's benefit. This was just us, finally honest, finally brave enough to reach for what we wanted. When we broke apart, both of us were crying, but we were smiling too, and I felt like my whole world had just rearranged itself into something beautiful and new. I love you, Anthony whispered against my lips, the words I'd dreamed of hearing for so long. I love you, and I'm scared, and I'm excited, and I want to build something real with you. I love you too, I whispered back, holding him close as the music played around us. We'll figure it out together. 3 weeks later, I'm standing in my kitchen making coffee for 2, and it still feels like a dream. The morning light streams through the window as Anthony shuffles in wearing one of my old t-shirts, his hair messy from sleep, and my heart does that same flutter it's been doing since our first real kiss at the party. "Morning," he murmurs, wrapping his arms around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. These small intimacies are still new to him, but he initiates them more often now, like he's testing the waters of who he's becoming. "Sleep okay?" I ask, leaning back into his warmth. We've been taking things slowly, respecting the magnitude of what this means for him. Some nights he stays over, others he goes home to process everything alone. I've learned not to take it personally when he needs space. "Better when you're here," he admits quietly, and I feel him smile against my neck. "I've been thinking about tonight. Tonight, Anthony's company is having another social event, and we're planning to attend as a real couple. No pretending, no charade. Just us, together, authentic for the first time in a professional setting." Second thoughts. I turn in his arms, studying his face. Over these 3 weeks, I've learned to read the subtle signs of his internal struggles, the way his jaw tightens when he's overthinking, how his eyes get distant when he's processing his shifting identity. "No," he says firmly, then softer, "Maybe. Not about us, never about us. Just about everything else." I understand. Coming out to himself was one thing. Coming out to the world is another entirely. We've been having these conversations regularly, late at night when his defenses are down and he can be completely honest about his fears. "We don't have to rush anything," I remind him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "We can take as long as you need." "I know. That's what makes this easier." He cups my face gently. "You've been so patient with me, Stephen. I know this isn't easy for you either." He's right. Loving someone who's discovering their sexuality while you're already fully out comes with its own challenges. There are moments when I feel like I'm holding my breath, waiting for him to decide this is too complicated, too different from what he thought he wanted. But then he looks at me like this, with such certainty and tenderness, and I remember that love isn't about guarantees. After coffee, we take our usual morning walk through the neighborhood. It's become our ritual, this quiet time before the day begins, where we can just be together without the weight of labels or expectations. Anthony reaches for my hand naturally now, no longer glancing around nervously like he did the first week. I talked to Riley yesterday. He mentions as we passed the park where we had our first real conversation about all this. "She wants to meet you properly. As my boyfriend, not just my friend." My heart lifts. Riley is Anthony's younger sister, the person whose opinion matters most to him. "What did you tell her?" "That I'm terrified and happy and completely in love with my best friend." He stops walking, turning to face me. "That I never understood what people meant when they talked about finding their person until I stopped pretending I didn't want to be with you." These moments still take my breath away. Anthony has always been articulate, but there's something different about how he talks about us now, raw and honest in a way that makes me feel like I'm seeing parts of him no one else has ever witnessed. "I love you too," I say, because it never gets old hearing it or saying it. All of you. The parts that are sure and the parts that are still figuring it out. Later that afternoon, I'm introducing Anthony to George, my longtime friend who's been my anchor through years of dating disasters and unrequited crushes. George has been supportive of my sexuality since I came out in college, and his approval means everything to me. "So you're the Anthony," George says with a knowing smile as we sit in the coffee shop where I've spent countless hours analyzing every interaction Anthony and I ever had. "Stephen's been talking about you for months." Anthony glances at me, amused. "Has he now?" "Oh, constantly. Anthony said this. Anthony did that. Anthony smiled at me, and I think I'm dying." George's impression of me is embarrassingly accurate. "Honestly, I was starting to think you were a figment of his imagination." "I almost wish I had been," Anthony says quietly. "Would have saved us both a lot of confusion. But then you wouldn't have this," George points out, gesturing between us. "Sometimes the best things are worth the confusion." As evening approaches, we get ready for the company event together. Anthony adjusts his tie in my bedroom mirror, and I watch him prepare to step into this new version of himself publicly. There's nervousness in his movements, but also determination. "Ready?" I ask, straightening his collar. "With you?" "Yeah." He takes my hand, the gesture that started everything. "Let's go be real." The party is smaller this time, more intimate. When we walk in together, Hannah approaches immediately with a genuine smile. I'm so glad you two figured it out, she says warmly. It was pretty obvious at the last party that there was something real there. Anthony squeezes my hand. Was it that obvious? To everyone but you two, apparently. She laughs. You looked at each other like you were already in love. The fake boyfriend thing was just an excuse. As the evening progresses, I watch Anthony navigate conversations with colleagues, introducing me not as his friend or his fake boyfriend, but simply as Steven, the person he's with, the person he chose, the person he loves. During a quiet moment on the hotel balcony, away from the crowd, Anthony pulls me close. Thank you, he says softly. For what? For being patient while I caught up to what my heart already knew. For loving me through the confusion. For making this feel safe. I kiss him then, slow and certain, tasting the future on his lips. When we break apart, he's smiling that smile I've loved for months, the one that's finally, completely mine. So what happens now? I ask. Now we figure it out together, he says, taking my hand again. One day at a time. And as we stand there, overlooking the city lights, I know that whatever comes next, we'll face it honestly, bravely, and hand in hand.